Gary Goldsmith started out as a secretary for British Airways, eventually becoming an airline hostess when she met Michael Middleton, a flight dispatcher for British Airways in the mid-70s. By 1981, they were married, and Catherine was born a year later. Pippa followed a year after that. Then finally came James in 1987. With her family complete, Carole set about ensuring that their future would take the trajectory of upward social mobility. Now, although claiming some distant aristocratic roots, Carole came from humble beginnings. She spent her early years growing up in the council flats in Ealing, a working class area in London. Vibrant, fearless, and fiercely ambitious from the outset, Carole always had grand plans to break out of her middle-class existence. The moment came in 1987, it is said, after struggling to find appropriate accessories for Kate's birthday. The inspiration illuminated like a light bulb in her head, and eureka! Party Pieces was born. In the initial days, the business struggled like any new business, but they eventually saw enough growth to necessitate expansion to a larger facility. By now, they had both quit their jobs at British Airways and went whole hog into the party supplies business, a model that was strictly mail order. It's been reported that at its peak, the business was reportedly worth somewhere in the neighborhood of £30 million. However, Michael at this time had inherited a trust fund from an aristocratic grandparent, and that the family's wealth was actually the result of their business combined with this trust fund, resulting in the Middletons being reported as multimillionaires. Now, when Kate was deciding which college to go to after graduating from Marlborough, she applied initially to the University of Edinburgh and was accepted. However, according to the Netflix series The Crown, upon finding out that William would be entering St. Andrew, Carole insisted that Kate change her plans and switch schools. It was a risky bet. Kate had already secured a place in Britain's top school. She was said to be a hard-working student and would very likely have went on to have a fulfilling career. But that wasn't enough for Carole. Her daughters were going to be her key into the upper echelons of Britain's impossible social hierarchy. But Carole Middleton is not a woman who gives up easily on anything. Carole always had lofty ambitions. She would use the tenuous success of the business along with the trust fund, which in all likelihood was probably propping up the business. And with this, she would create the perfect backdrop of wealth. This was crucial to her plans to secure a future for her children firmly in Britain's upper crust. But Carole's plans would require a bigger budget. And the truth was that by the early 2000s, e-commerce slowly began to eat into traditional mail-order businesses such as Party Pieces. The proliferation of large e-com stores, namely Amazon, was the death knell for Party Pieces. On top of that, as a result of constantly having to keep up with the Joneses in order to raise the social currency of her daughters, thus making them more attractive to well-situated husbands, Carole had already been over-leveraged. She had borrowed a significant amount of money from various creditors, had services rendered with promises of later payments. It didn't help that the Middletons continued to spend profligately, failing to reinvest into the company and choosing instead to use every bit of cash earned from the business to create the illusion that they belonged to the upper class. There was the London flat paid for in cash, the $1 million mansion, the cars, expensive trips, and of course, her children's private education. By the mid-2000s, the writing was on the wall. Sales were declining due to big-name online competitors. it became clear that she had to pivot. It is reported that at this time, Carole's brother, Gary Goldsmith, became involved, advising her to move the business online. It is said that sales took off after this prudent advice. Now, the actual source of the business's success remains a topic for debate. Gary, the ever flamboyant and colorful character that he is, came with a dubious past of his own. He had a string of failed marriages, some lasting as little as a few months, and he was accused by several of his former wives, including his current one, of assault. Now, Gary is reportedly a multi-millionaire. He supposedly made his wealth from selling his share of a technology recruiting firm, of which he was a partner during the 90s. However, the true provenance of his wealth is shrouded in speculation. In 2009, he was caught in a sting where he was filmed selling cocaine to an undercover reporter. By the time Gary became involved in party pieces, Carole was already heavily in debt and teetering on the edge, but Kate was almost there. After a couple of brief splits, the two had gotten back together, and when the engagement was finally announced, Carole's business was most likely on the verge of collapse. Now, the press often likes to use COVID as a reason for the demise of party pieces, but the evidence shows that the business was in trouble long before the pandemic, with creditors from as far back as the royal wedding complaining about not being paid for services rendered. So who or what was propping up the Middletons' business? Now, in 2012, with the help of their new son-in-law, the Middletons purchased this sprawling 18-acre estate in Bucklebury worth an estimated £4.7 million. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. Kate was now a senior member of the royal family, and Pippa was still on the hunt to snag her own prize, but we'll talk about her later. And party pieces was supposedly humming along. Now fast forward 8 years, and sometime in the early morning of June in 2020, someone reported a massive power outage in the Bucklebury area where the family's sprawling 18-acre estate sat. Now, upon investigating the cause of the power outage, workers nearby discovered a massive marijuana farm. Now, initially, the press reported that the farm was located nearby the Middleton property, without actually saying that the farm was a part of the Middleton property itself. But the actual owner of this marijuana farm was never revealed, and there were no reports of any arrests, and the story died as soon as it was reported. Now, during this time, folks, Gary was very much involved in Kate and William's lives. When the two started dating, he invited the couple to spend time on his yacht, where the paparazzi had a field day photographing the lovebirds sunbathing under the Mediterranean sun in Ibiza. The pair also spent significant time in his villa in Ibiza, which he called La Maison de Bang Bang. Now, I'll leave the translation of that up to your imagination, folks. Now, for anyone with an ounce of street smarts, it is pretty obvious that Uncle G, as he became affectionately known, was your prototypical gangster. He flaunted his dubious wealth in much the same way any old drug dealer would. But what is clear to me here is that William was as clueless as they come when it came to the Middletons and the provenance of their wealth. Now, is it possible that Gary used party pieces as a front for a marijuana business? Well, the answer to that lies in the outcome of the police investigation. However, there appears to be no reports of any arrests or prosecution after the bust. It's almost like it never happened. Now, I think that it was around this time that William woke up to the truth about the Middletons. Just 3 years after the marijuana bust, around late spring 2023, the whole house of cards came came crashing down, and every publication in the British press had the Middletons' collapse on the front pages. Now, it was at this time William's attitude towards Kate began to change. It seemed he was colder to her in public, and at the same time, Kate began looking thinner and thinner. Now, it is clear to me that he was embarrassed about his in-laws' spectacular fall. But folks, I think the real cause of his embarrassment was his pride. William had been hoodwinked into believing that Kate was from a family of a certain social caliber due to their reported wealth, a wealth that was as hollow as a Hollywood backdrop. Add in the taint of suspicion with Uncle G's questionable involvement in illicit drugs, with William and Kate cavorting on his yacht and in his Bang Bang Villa. William must have felt very foolish and naive. Now remember, William hadn't yet inherited the Duchy of Cornwall when he used his mother's inheritance to finance the purchase of the sprawling Bucklebury estate. Now obviously I don't know the circumstances under which he felt compelled to do this, but what I do know is that it showed his lack of street smarts for sure. How could he have fallen for such a cunning and wily trick? He must have thought to himself that he was the victim of an elaborate scam. Now, if you think Queen Elizabeth wasn't horrified about William's involvement with the Middleton clan, then you must be asleep. But here we see how William's cloistered upbringing failed to open his eyes to the possibility that he was being played. Now, I'm not saying he didn't love Kate when he proposed, but what I do believe is that had he known the truth about the true status of her wealth, snobbery and loyalty to his class would have prevented him from ever proposing to her. This is why Carole had to fight tooth and nail to prop up the facade of wealth by any means necessary. Now, as many of you folks may suspect, the whole situation culminated into a spectacular fallout at the end of 2023, the same year Party Pieces went into administration, followed by Kate's enigmatic disappearance. But if you recall, she wasn't the only one that disappeared last year. Her parents were MIA right along with her. Now, one theory I have previously proposed, when the truth about the Middletons was unveiled, William felt like a fool, and of course took it out on, well, who else but Kate? The pressure on Kate became unbearable, and that's when she stopped eating. I came across this article recently that was published sometime last year in the midst of Kate's disappearance. And folks, it makes sense that Kate could have gone through a mental break due to the pressure she was facing from a very angry and embarrassed William. Now, I don't know if anything physical occurred, but there were reports leading up to this event that stated that they were constantly fighting, throwing things at each other, and well, it wouldn't surprise me if it got to Kate and she responded by not eating or some kind of self-harming behavior like bulimia. And folks, this could have landed her in serious health trouble. In the 1990s, a young woman from Florida named Terry Schiavo, with a history of bulimia, experienced a catastrophic stroke which left her permanently brain damaged for years. The story made global headlines as her husband wanted to end her suffering by disconnecting her from the machines that were keeping her alive. This, of course, made me think of Concha Calleja, the Spanish journalist who reported that Kate had been placed in an induced coma. Now, eating disorders aren't anything new, especially in affluent households, and certainly not uncommon in royal households. In the 1990s, Princess Diana admitted that she was suffering from bulimia, no doubt as a result of the constant stress she was facing with the press and, well, the third person in her marriage. And for those of you who say, well, Kate's always been naturally thin, if you look at some pictures of Kate in the past, I mean, that girl's got some meat on her bones. And look, folks, I don't need to tell you that obviously eating disorders have always been a thing in celebrity culture. Now, I could be wrong about this theory, of course. I don't pretend to sit here and yap about the goings-on of people as if I was there. I have to rely on reports from the press, which brings me to a comment someone made the other day. And this will be the last thing I talk about. I believe the comment goes something like, I hate Kate and that I never say anything bad about Meghan, something to that effect. To which I responded that I do not hate Kate, which I certainly don't. Whether you want to believe that or not is up to you, really doesn't matter to me. But what I do hate is the hypocrisy of the British press. Now, I believe the commenter followed up my response to something to the effect of, well, if you think the British press are hypocrites, then why do I cite them? Well, where else am I supposed to get my information? I don't know these people other than what the Royal Rota reports. Are you really being serious here? Where am I supposed to get my information? Now, are you saying that I shouldn't be talking about them at all? Well, sorry, honey, that's not gonna happen. You'll just have to suffer through listening to me, or just keep scrolling, makes no difference to me. I hate the fact that the press uses Kate, propping up her and her family as though they are some paragons of virtue, in order to use them as a cudgel against the Sussexes. This has been the playbook of the royal family for a long time. Harry talked about this at length in his book about how members of the family, in order to get positive press, will sacrifice other members by offering them up in some kind of sick quid pro quo. One of the things I came across in my research, and I promise this will be the last thing I'm going to say because I don't want this video to be too long, is that Kate worked on a yacht. I didn't even talk about this because I don't think there's anything to it other than your regular run-of-the-mill teenage job. But I do recall a time when all you would hear in the internet streets was Meghan the Yacht Girl attempting to recreate a past that does not exist, when there is absolutely no evidence that Meghan ever worked on a yacht. There is, however, evidence that Kate worked on a yacht. Now, like I said, I don't think there's anything to it other than her just being a teenage deckhand. If Meghan had the kind of past that Kate did, they would be having a field day. But it's Kate, so there's silence. And I don't think that's Kate's fault. But is she benefiting from this? Yes, she is. Anyway, stay tuned for part 3.